Well, it is officially the week of the Game Awards. And the Game Awards is something that happens every year around the same time. And to be completely honest, I'm actually looking forward to this. I always have enjoyed watching the Game Awards. Yes, there have been disappointing moments in the show, but there's also been exciting moments. I truly feel like it is a celebration of gaming when this show comes on, and I think it is miles better than the Summer Games Fest. And so I'm actually looking forward to it. And I wanted to talk about Nintendo's history with the Game Awards and talk about if they are going to show up at this year's Game Awards. Because a lot of people are speculating. Not to mention, there is so much speculation on what the Game Awards could show this year. I mean, we're seeing people talk about Half-Life 3, which it kind of surprises me that we're actually thinking that Half-Life 3 has a chance to show, let alone exist, because I feel like everyone's been talking about Half-Life 3 probably since I've been born, to be honest. But hey, maybe now's the time. Maybe this Game Awards actually has Half-Life 3. But that's besides the point. Let's get in today's video talking about all of this awesome stuff. Now, I typically don't do prediction videos on the Game Awards because the Game Awards just does so much more than just Nintendo. You have PlayStation, you have Xbox, you have all of these companies, you have indies. There's so much that could happen at the Game Awards. However, I will not be able to cover this year's Game Awards when it happens because I will be out of state going to New York City filming other videos. So it kind of stinks to have my tradition of covering the Game Awards for what, I think it's been 6 years at this point that I've made videos on this show. But at least I get to kind of cover it by making a prediction video. And I wanted to start this video off by talking about the history of Nintendo showing up at the Game Awards. Because Nintendo actually has had a history. Now, a lot of people believe that they don't care about the Game Awards because over the last few years, it kind of does feel like that. But what a lot of people don't realize is that Nintendo showed some of their biggest announcements ever in the early days of the Game Awards. And I really wanted to go over each year of what Nintendo showed. In 2014, they showed the first gameplay of Zelda Wii U because it was called Zelda Wii U at that time. What was the most funniest thing about this footage is they didn't show HD footage. All you got was them playing on a TV. And I'll never forget the amount of speculation videos that came out of this gameplay footage. It actually broke the internet, and it was probably one of the most unexpected things to see happen at the Game Awards. And that was at the 2014 show, which was, wow, 11 years ago at this point. I feel old because I remember seeing that live and I was like, wow, this is actually happening. But then the 2015 Game Awards happened and Nintendo did not have a presence there despite having a lot of nominees that year with games like Splatoon and Super Mario Maker. There was a lot of speculation that Nintendo didn't have anything to show just due to the fact that they were focusing hard at what was called the Nintendo NX at the time, which if you guys don't know, that was the code name for Nintendo Switch. Because that E3 2015, they had a weaker show, which showed that a lot of these games that Nintendo was working on was going towards that next system. But then we jump forward into 2016. Nintendo actually had a presence there. They had an announcement of showing more Zelda Breath of the Wild footage. This time, we actually got to see HD footage, which I think is kind of poetic since we got the first footage of it being on a TV back in 2014. I don't know if this was Nintendo making a joke, but we got a lot of footage from the Game Awards, and that's all that Nintendo showed off in 2016. But then we go into 2017. This was the year that the Nintendo Switch actually came out, and Nintendo had a strong presence at that year's Game Awards. Not only were they nominated for the Game of the Year twice with Breath of the Wild and Mario Odyssey, but they had announcements throughout the whole 2017 show. One of those announcements was the fact that Bayonetta 1 and 2 was coming to the Nintendo Switch February 2018. Then later on, they showed a trailer of the Breath of the Wild DLC pack, which this surprised a lot of people, and if I recall correctly, the DLC shadow dropped that night after the Game Awards, which surprised so many people. But then that's not all that Nintendo threw at us. They threw one more announcement with Reggie Fils-Aimé talking about how Bayonetta 3 was in development for the Nintendo Switch. But then we jump into 2018. Nintendo showed off a big third-party collaboration, which was with Marvel. They decided to make Ultimate Alliance 3 exclusively for the Nintendo Switch. This threw a lot of people off because it's Nintendo funding a Marvel game. And Ultimate Alliance, of all things, this was a franchise that we didn't think was ever going to get another game, let alone on a Nintendo system. It truly came out of nowhere. But that wasn't all that Nintendo brought out. What was funny about the Game Awards in 2018 is that it was happening the day before Super Smash Bros. Ultimate arrived onto the Nintendo Switch. And so, at that show, they play it off that the show is being hacked, but it actually wasn't being hacked. It was showing off a trailer with the Phantom Thieves announcing that Joker would be a playable character in Super Smash Bros. This threw a lot of people off because we were not expecting to see a DLC character announcement the day before Smash Bros. Came out. And a lot of people consider that to be one of the biggest announcements ever into the Game Awards because of how it was announced. I bring all of this up because at this point, every year Nintendo fans had high expectations from the Game Awards to show something Nintendo, since they had 3 back-to-back years of showing off crazy things. But we jump into 2019 and it was a smaller year when it came to the Nintendo presence at the Game Awards. Nintendo dropped another third-party announcement, which was Bravely Default 2. Which I think a lot of people was looking forward to this, but there was a lot of people at the same time that didn't play the previous Bravely Default games. So I don't think that announcement did a lot of things for a lot of people. I think it more disappointed people, especially with what came after it, which was Ultimate Alliance DLC. I think a lot of people was thinking that Smash Bros. Was going to be at the 2019 Game Awards, because at the time, we only had one fighter announcement left out of Fighter Pass 1, but Smash Bros. Did not have a presence, and I think that is why people was so disappointed. But then we jump into 2020. And I feel like a lot of people had very low expectations when it came to the Nintendo side of things going into the Game Awards after what happened in 2019. But I'll never forget, the day before the Game Awards happened, they actually announced that Smash Bros. Would have a presence at the Game Awards, announcing that there would be another fighter reveal, which this threw everyone off, especially at the timeline of events. We had already had Steve reveal just a few weeks before the Game Awards. So the fact that we were getting another character reveal so soon really surprised people. So everyone was looking forward to the Game Awards 2020 when it came to the Nintendo fans. Now, I think a lot of people are asking, what was the character reveal? It was Sephiroth coming to Super Smash Bros., which that was a giant announcement and made so much sense to have it at the Game Awards. But that was all that Nintendo showed at the 2020 Game Awards, which was DLC. And I want you guys to remember all the DLC that we are talking about throughout this video, because there's a theme here. We jump into 2021 and Nintendo did not have a presence here. They got nominated for a lot of things, but there was no announcement. We jump into 2022, they actually had another Bayonetta announcement, which was the fact that a spin-off game was happening for the Nintendo Switch, and that it was coming out in 2023. And they also announced later in the show that Fire Emblem Engage was going to be having an expansion pack, and they showed a little bit of that in a commercial. We jump into 2023, they were not there, but they did have commercials play throughout the whole Game Awards. Then we go into 2024, the same thing happened. They had no announcement, but commercials playing throughout. And now that leaves us into 2025. Am I expecting Nintendo to have the same thing, where they just show commercials with no announcement? Normally, I would say yes. However, I feel like this year is a little bit different. We look at this year, we have a brand new Nintendo console, the Nintendo Switch 2. This is the system's first year, and it's only been out for 6 months by the time that the Game Awards happens. And I feel like with that in mind, I do think Nintendo will be here to promote the Switch 2, maybe even have a game announcement here at the Game Awards. Now, I'm sure a lot of y'all are asking me, Max, if you think Nintendo is going to be here, what is it going to be? Is it going to be a brand new game? I think a brand new game is still possible to happen, but I'm leaning more on something different to be shown off here. I think that they're actually going to announce that Mario Kart World is getting DLC. And I wouldn't be surprised if they announce some sort of DLC expansion pack here. But what I'm really expecting to come from this is the fact that they're doing a Donkey Kong Bonanza free update. And I'm saying free, it could still be paid DLC, but I think all of that is going to be unveiled here at the Game Awards. Now, I'm sure a lot of people are like, Max, Mario Kart World, Donkey Kong Bonanza, you're being very specific here. Why do you think this is happening? Well, if you haven't been following the news with the Nintendo Today app, someone managed to data mine the app, and it has been found that on December 15th, the app is going to be updated with a lot of King K. Rool renders. And I feel like it's a little weird to be having these renders drop out of nowhere. I feel like there definitely has to be a reason behind it. And if you play Mario Kart World, it's very noticeable how much Donkey Kong content isn't there. I mean, if you look at the amount of costumes that is there for Pauline and Donkey Kong, I think there's only 2 costumes each for those characters compared to some of these other characters out there. I feel like they have definitely held back some content because they were going to drop a Bonanza update at some point into the game. And I feel like they had to wait for this because of Donkey Kong Bonanza spoilers. However, we're 6 months later into the game. I think it's now at a point where they're going to show that King K. Rool is in the game. I think there's going to be a lot of K. Rool marketing happening in the next month. That's why there's so many renders about the drop. And I think part of that marketing process is going to be adding him into Mario Kart World. And I think it's going to be a free update just because I feel like a lot of this content was already ready to go. They just wanted to wait for the right moment when it came to Donkey Kong Bonanza. Now, if you remember earlier in this video, I said to remember the fact that Nintendo was showing DLC off. And I go back to that part of the video now. If you notice, the history between Nintendo and the Game Awards is that Nintendo has shown more DLC off at this show than actual games. And I think part of that is because Nintendo realizes that they can announce these games their own way. I don't know if Nintendo has to pay to be at the Game Awards showing off game announcements, or if it's one of those things that Jeff Keighley shows up to Nintendo and be like, hey, do you have anything to show for us to have at the Game Awards? We'll give you a discount, something like that, because I'm sure somehow, some way, the Game Awards makes money off Nintendo being there, or maybe, I don't know, Jeff Keighley pays these people to have this stuff at their show. There has to be something like that. And maybe the Game Awards is just kind of expensive and it doesn't make sense for Nintendo to do a brand new game announcement. However, they did commercials and then mixed in within the commercials having the announcement of the Mario Kart DLC. I feel like that's what they're going to do. I think what Nintendo does going forward with the Game Awards is just show DLC things off. I think having game announcements is something that's not going to be a common thing. I'm not saying it's never going to happen again, but it's still possible that they would do it this year, especially with it being the first year of the Switch 2 at the Game Awards. But I think Nintendo is now going more of an approach of doing their own announcements. And that might be why that they've been staying away from the Game Awards over the last few years. I expect as we go into next year's Game Awards, we're probably not going to see Nintendo have much of a presence there when it comes to announcements. But I think this year we do see something Nintendo. I want to hear from you guys though. What do you think this is going to be? Do you guys agree with my Mario Kart prediction? Because I feel like that is incredibly likely to have happened, especially with us going into the Christmas season. I wouldn't be surprised if Nintendo drops this Mario Kart update right after the Game Awards, to be honest. I mean, we've seen them do that with Breath of the Wild. And if it's a paid DLC expansion, I think that makes a lot of sense to have that happen during the holiday season. However, my theory is that the Donkey Kong stuff is going to be free, and then maybe Nintendo announces more DLC with Mario Kart. I don't know how they'll do it. I'm just expecting that the Bonanza stuff to be free. Or do you think I'm an idiot? Do you think we're actually going to get a new game? Or we're just going to get nothing at all like we have over the last few years with Nintendo and the Game Awards? I want to hear everything you guys have to say in the comments down below. But guys, I have been talking for way too much. Make sure to backslash that subscribe button, like the video, check out the Twitter, Discord, Instagram, all that good stuff in the description below. Become a Monado Marine, $5 a month. Helps out the channel tremendously. And I will see you guys at the next, or in the next video. Not at the next video. In the next video. Peace. Have fun at the Game Awards. I'll still be watching it. It's just I won't be able to do a video right after it because I'll be in a hotel room. So that's unfortunate, but it'll still be great, right? Y'all guys don't need my videos for the Game Awards. There's other YouTubers out there. I'll see y'all in the other one, or the next video. Yeah. I've messed up this outro completely. We were doing well, and then I just decided to add dialogue. I should have just wrapped it up.